don't understand this. Welcome to HorrorCon.
Hey, everybody. We're talking about horror today, suspense writing. We have Josh Lyman with us. A few other people are going to be popping in as we go. We were talking off air about how horror has changed in the last couple of years. Can you bring that point up? Because I think you really nailed it.
Well, thanks for asking. Yeah, we were discussing just in general how horror has evolved. You were actually talking about how it's turned into more of a heavily focused on visual versus actual story. Translation, Saw movies, for example, or The Purge or anything like that, where it's like the creep sensation versus the actual, like, what is going on in the event or the story for the comic or the movie. And I agree. I think it's one of those things where like horror in itself evolved from first off a literary format, and then it moved into an audio format with radio, the old time radio shows back in the heyday. And then that slowly evolved into what we like to call classic horror. And that, just kept evolving as we progressed as a nation, or let alone a world.
I was on mute. Sorry. Do you think that we're going to see like maybe radio drama showing up? We were talking about it off air, and I've heard a couple people mention I really like the idea of doing these radio dramas. Do you think we could see a new age of creative outlets where people are going to start doing that again and maybe start just being more creative and showing new art even online, coming up with original concepts? Because without the cons, it's harder to sell online. You almost have to come up with something original and new, right?
I would look forward to seeing it. I actually will. I will say one of the things that I've noticed. I kind of sit on the middle ground as far as that's concerned. So I do comic book conventions and I work with independent comic book artists, but I'm typically more aware of what's going on with like trending for comic books and things like that. And if you haven't had the opportunity on Webtoons, the large amount of what's popular for them is horror. Or horror with romance influences. Yes, of course, Lore Olympus is the most popular and trending on Webtoons. However, most of the books that I'm reading are like, at least virtually reading on Webtoons, are like the zombie unicorn apocalypse. And then there's, there's Constantine-esque storylines where it's like a pumpkin-headed character running around with somebody who's just found out that she has magical powers and has to defeat dark entities. A little bit more of the broader spectrum horror when it comes to like mythical influence.
Let's just talk about the fact of, you said you wrote a horror and you actually did the art of it. Is there a different gear you go into to write such things? Like when you're down to do that, is it different?
Well, when you're writing horror comic books, it's one of those things where it's like you may able to write out a really, really great story, and you may focus on like the inner monologue of your character or anything like that. But what it ends up happening is that sometimes won't translate as well visually. So if you're working on both sides of the spectrum, when you're sitting there and you're having to write it and then you have to go and create it, you're kind of boned. So what ends up happening is you have to figure out which way you want to work. Do you want to focus on the visuals, or do you want to focus on the story that you're telling? And I think that's what I really ran into the issue when I first was doing those books. That was years ago, and my talent level, has gone up tremendously since then. But it was one of those things where like back then I was heavily influenced by those podcasts and radios and things like that. So like for me, it was all about, let me tell the story, and like visually, I just couldn't fully tell what I wanted to tell back then.
Do you think there's a different skill also with being able to draw horror? Because in the movies, we have 5 minutes of someone slowly following someone. But in a comic book, you get 1 or 2 panels to do that. So do you think there's a harder aspect of drawing, not the violent scenes, which can be very graphic, but the other scenes which have to kind of allude to something bad happening in a few seconds?
Well, it's funny you say that, because my first instinct when you describe that is borderline horror comics like Spawn and The Darkness and Witchblade. And if you guys have never read those before, they started out in the 90s, but long story short, they all focus on the concept of a hero who has to work on the darker side of the world, where like things aren't always pretty. And you have to deal with some very caustic words like, molestation or spousal abuse, or people being butchered and slaughtered by serial killers, or, a lot of these things that are much, much darker elements. And I guess it really just depends on your flow. I mean, frankly speaking, most of the Spawn books are really, really slow. Because they're trying to tell those stories where they're like, hey, we're following this guy. So we have to have the conversation between the two framing police cops. And that goes on for 2 or 3 issues back and forth as they interact, and then suddenly you realize, oh, it's a demonic or monstrous influence, and that's when Spawn comes in and beats the crap out of them. So I guess it really just comes down to the writer. If you look at Hellboy, that's another thing, but I'll touch on that later.
Now, one of the things that I think we both agree with this is that Marvel has no idea how to write suspense right now. DC, I think, still can write a suspenseful comic, but Marvel, it feels like spoon-feeding more so than ever when it comes to comic books. Like they're writing for children, but the stories aren't for children, they're for adults. And I don't understand that writing style. Do you think Marvel's capable of writing suspenseful stuff anymore?
Excuse me. That's a good question. I keep looking forward to it every time I see something. Like, for example, they announced that they were going to do a new book that involved like Morbius and Blade and a few other characters. But I think it really comes down to is their core editors when it comes down to it. I mean, the short answer is no. I don't think they can do suspense well. They can do action and they can tell a really long story arc for tie-in, which may not be good. It might be all right. But it really kind of just boils down to is forcing artists to work and writers to work in collaboration again. Whereas, with the older horror, you could tell a story much shorter. You could be like, here it is. Oh my God, I'm the monster. And you run away. And that's not really Marvel's focus. They want you to continue to buy for every single issue. They want to continue, bringing in that paycheck. So.
We are joined by Marcus Roberts. Marcus, you've done horror, you've done suspense comics, and we're going to do the intros in just about another 10 or 15 minutes. We're deliberately skipping that right now just because we're expecting 1 or 2 more people. But Marcus, tell us a little bit about what you think about writing. How is it as a writer to write horror when you have to put those hooks in? Because in the movies, you can rely heavily on the music, the creepy music, and that really helps a lot of horror movies where comics don't have that. So how do you put suspense? How do you put horror into your books? Because I know you're picking up a title from Bradley this year, right?
Yeah, I'm picking up the Leave on the Light series. And the thing about horror in the 21st century, it differs greatly from the horror back from the 50s and 60s in that we've had so much exposure to different levels of sadism and masochism. Even in video games.
Are we talking about my books?
Well, not specifically, but because of the exposure of everything, it's hard to just surprise audiences nowadays. So the whole key is trying to tap into something that, even though it's not a surprise to them, they still find it scary. Like Jason in the 80s was scary.
Yeah.
Jason in 2020 is going to get shot. Somebody's going to stand their ground on them. So it's just not scary.
It's a really good example too, because with the Jason and Freddy movies, you started out like slowly revealing the mystery of where this monster, or this serial killer character came from, and then as they come on, I'm like, who this is, slash, 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 slash. Oh, look, boobs, slash, slash, slash. Okay, someone's head gets taken off.
Yeah, and they made those sequels, and the sequels were, successful because people became fans of the character. They knew in Friday the 13th, Part 5, Jason's going to come. He's going to kill a bunch of people. They're going to find a way to kill him into the movie. And yet people still want to see it. Not because of the shock they were going to get from the movie, but because they were fans. So that in itself is something else to consider when writing. Am I making a character that people will gravitate to, that people will become a fan of and want to see him in action even more? I think that's why Bradley's run on Leave on the Light was successful, because he created a character that fans liked.
And it's very true. Do you think that horror is the probably the number one place you do find a lot more suspense, because I put them together on purpose, because I don't think you can have good horror without suspense unless it's CNN News. Outside of CNN News in real life, I think that you need suspense to build horror. Am I wrong?
Yes and no, because they can be looked at differently. Suspense can be looked at something that is without the blood, without the gore, something that's more along the lines of a psychological thriller, something built to invoke fear, whereas horror is more shock value. So with horror, you want to see blood, you want to see guts, you want to see somebody getting the arm hacked off. You know, you want to see zombies and vampires because they are horrific.
What do you think, Josh? Is it a suspense medium, or is, like he said, is it sometimes gore and shock value?
It's I mean, it really comes down to is that a lot of people, Marcus touched on it briefly, but horror in itself has so many subgenres now that suspense can be a major element of it, or it can create a new storyline. One of the best examples I would say is that Underworld series. It's not great, but it's technically considered horror. You know, technically it's also more of a superhero drama, comic adventure, etc. But that's because of what the elements that they deal with. It's considered a horror genre. For myself, I really hate any kind of like outbreak film that's not really zombies. You know, like it's a virus, like contamination, because that can branch and can be considered a horror meets a thriller or action film. Or like when they play with the concept of a possessed person, and it's like there's only so many ways that you can do The Exorcist. You know, after a while, that just gets old. So it's just is like, you know, oh look, it's the haunting of Emily Doe, so and so. It's the possession of so and so Emily. You know, so on and so forth. It's I would have to say is that it really just depends on what sub story you're trying to really tell. Like if you want somebody to be wrapped in on the visual medium, be it for comic books or anything like that, you need something that blends together, that makes you want to keep reading it, to be like, hey, I need to keep turning the page and see what happens. You know, so you have to be able to blend those two things together.
Now, one of my favorite horror films, and I didn't know it was a horror film or categorized that until I actually went to, and this is going to date me a bit, a Blockbuster. But I actually found it in a section, and I didn't realize it. I always considered it a suspense. Seven is considered a horror film, and I never realized that you could categorize that as a horror film. But if you think about it, it makes sense. That guy was just like really terrifying how well he could play you.
Yeah, if you go and look for that as far as like for digital content, that definitely shows up in horror, but it also shows up in suspense, and it also shows up in mystery. That pretty much touches it perfectly. It really does. It's like, hey, it's one of those. It's a cross genre storyline. You know,
what are your guys' favorite suspense and or horror films? Like, to me that stands out in my head. That'll always be it. And other suspense one, I would say Fight Club. Just suspense, Fight Club. What do you guys think? What are your favorites?
Marcus?
Well, I don't know. There are so many movies.
Such a loaded question, right?
Yeah, I'm telling you. I have so many different movies that's in my head. I guess I have to go back to the original, go to Psycho, because to me, as far as horror / suspense, set in the time period and based on the character in which it was based on, I mean, that covered both genres perfectly. I don't know if people are familiar with Ed Gein or the backstory for Psycho, but Ed Gein was an actual person that they based the story on, and his actions were during the time in which it happened. I mean, they were very horrible. They were terrifying, as a matter of fact. Now, here in 2020, because we have gotten accustomed to hearing about that type of behavior, it's not so shocking. But for the late 50s, for the 60s, that was something shocking. That was something terrible. And that's something that, we have to remember, that as we progress in the years, the content that we find disturbing or horrific or even suspenseful, it may not hold true now as it held true back then.
Do you guys think, and I've said this a lot, that because we live in an age of villains, and we're going to get to you, Josh, because I want to hear what your favorites are, but do you think we live in an age of villains? Because I've said that a lot. Like, it's almost hard to write a new villain because we see them so often paraded in front of us now. Thanks to 24-hour news, we're exposed to a lot of the ugliness of humanity. Plus, revisiting like Westworld, we always saw growing up as the Wild West is like, you know, gee, Ma, well, the bad boys are coming. We gotta hide, and they'd come in and we want your money. Like, it was never, as Westworld put it, this dirty and grimy and really honest place. So do you think we've seen so much that we're desensitized now?
Well, it's funny you say that. So one of the interesting things about Westworld is that was what, late 70s or 80s when the first one came out with Yul Brynner. Anybody remember? I believe it was late
70s.
Yeah.
70s.
Yeah. So like the original Westworld series, it was like Westworld and then it was Samurai World. Basically it was trying to tell this dark reality of like, hey, this is what happens if we have computers and we take them for granted and things like that. That I would actually say is a really good example of adding suspense to your story. With HBO, you kept the way they edited it and they told it. It was very much supposed to be, hey, something's rotten in Denmark. We haven't quite figured it out. We don't know who the bad guy is. And then the way that they told it, by chopping it up, it wasn't just everything went to pot suddenly. They were like, no, we're going to go back and let you know the origin of this person or the origin of this robot and why they're here so you can re-understand what we're watching. And I mean, I watched that and I was just like, this is great. But I don't know. When you compare it to the film kind of does it in a different element. It's almost it's that borderline, hey, what happens if computers take over? What if the government takes over? What if communism takes effect? It deals with the fears and the reality of that time. You're asking about, hey, are we living in a world of villains? Is it that harder to create a storyline? I would have to say I'd say early 2000s suddenly went on this trend where villains, we had to understand the good side of all of the villains. The best example I have is Maleficent. We suddenly had to make the good Maleficent storyline and be like, oh, she wasn't bad. She's just misunderstood. And there are several examples of this, including recently, if you guys have watched the Avengers Infinity War, with Thanos. Thanos, from his spawn of creation, was a man who was obsessed and in love with a physical and metaphysical incarnation of death. All he wanted to do was kill things. And so when we redesigned this villain, we made him so it's like, no, I'm doing it for the right reasons. It's because, there's so much tragedy and suffering in the world. We have to make it better. And ironically, the final film, when they're doing all this time travel back and forth, there's no justification. There's nothing. It's just Thanos is a bad guy, and he's a brutal bad guy. He's just slicing and dicing and doesn't care, and he's beating the crap out of people regardless of their social or, whatever agenda may be. And I would argue that it's not so much that we write so many villains and we see so many villains in the public eye, but it's more so it's just that we don't fully grasp what a villain is now because we've been trying to understand so much more and be like, oh, well, you don't know what their cultural or whatever history is. And be like, if a guy slices you into 7 pieces and then ties those up on the wall to make you look like, like a crane or something like that, then he's probably just a bad guy. He's probably just a villain, Yeah,
I agree wholeheartedly. I believe that it's hard to write a villain nowadays because we know and understand bad behavior so much that we excuse it. The challenge actually is writing a good guy because we are so conscious and so aware of how actions affect everyone else. It's like, okay, this guy is being good, but who wants him to be good? And that's the question now that's asked of every hero. Who wants him to be a hero? Who made you the law? Whereas it once was, you got a hero, automatically his authority just it usurps everything. But now it's like he's a hero, so what? I don't need a hero. I don't need another hero. So I think it's really harder to write a good guy than a bad guy. You just let somebody do something, and society will determine whether or not their actions are good or bad. So depending on how you actually construct your society, that will determine whether or not your character is actually a villain or a hero.
The age-old writing principle. What is your character's Bible? It's one of those things where it's like if you're not familiar with the character's Bible, for people listening, not so much everybody on the panel, a character Bible is where you take your character from what you're creating and you literally answer every single stupid question, from what do they drink first thing in the morning, and like, oh, they do vodka, first thing in the morning to wash down, their nightmares or something like that. It's one of those, you answer all of this so that you can constantly go back to that. Because one of the other things that a lot of people don't really touch on is that a writer's mood affects how they write the character. But that's a subtopic. But the character Bible is one of those things where it's like that will help you spawn who your character is supposed to be. So if you're writing a villain and your villain's, character Bible is less than that, if printed, you may not understand the entire totality of your character. You could keep it all straight up and be like, here, it's on one piece of paper, he's a badass, but having that core around your character makes it good.
We do have a message, and I'm going to read this one. Ari Shug says, they want to normalize villainy without calling out the evil and criminal behavior by saying they have an illness. Do you think we're making excuses for bad people because we're dealing with bad people so often? Or do you think this is, and I know this is a weird thing to bring up, but it's always said, do you think that this has something to do with maybe social justice warrior ism? Because I know a lot of people blame that on trying to make everyone acceptable when there clearly are lines. Like, how do we get to this moment? I guess I'm asking. What do you guys think?
I think it really comes with having a understanding of human behavior, and that builds for an excuse for that behavior. And because we have better understandings as to why the actual behaviors occur and can label the understanding that we have, it kind of desensitizes people as to the behavior itself. In other words, someone that's killing cats, we want to understand why he's killing the cats. Well, now we understand why he's killing the cats, and we see him killing cats, and we're like, oh, well, he's got this, and he's going to kill cats. Versus, this guy's killing cats. We need to do something about it.
I'm like, this is the transference. It's like, what's the psychology of a murderer? And I'm like, I don't know. There's one of those odd things. So like the general term of a social justice warrior, if you're not, influencing it based on opinion or anything like that, is somebody who takes a stance and decides to try to defend, be it like one thing or another, be it, gender neutral bathrooms to repressing, people who have lower household income or anything like that. And that can sometimes stem into this world. But as far as like what's a villain or you don't understand their psychosis. Yes, I believe that we started trying to say, okay, well, you're not from there. You don't understand what's going on. I think it comes down to what Marcus was talking about before, is like your world, creating the world of the person and creating the world of your characters. Unless you have the framework, you're not going to know what happens. But at the same time, in order to make a character like monstrous or suspenseful or anything else, if we jump back even further, it comes back to what we were saying about Jason. It's like Jason, Freddy, any of these characters, Jumping into comic books briefly for just a second, the Joker's the same way. You have to create a character that, yes, you get to know more and more and more, but you might suddenly discover one of those things that you learned about that character is a lie, and you have to go back because another writer retconned it, or another movie where it's like, oh yeah, Jason X, yeah, that never happened. He never went in the future. Just go with it. It's okay. All aliens look like humans, and they're all multi-gender, whatever. No, that didn't happen in the Jason universe ever. Never happened. He's a zombie now versus human being, and we never really fully addressed why he changed from overalls to a worker jacket and the hockey mask versus the hayseed thing, but so on and so forth. The exaggeration as it stands. I think with it touches to Devil was saying is it comes down to suspense. You have to remove things. If you give everything away, then you can't create something that makes people want to keep watching or following or understanding. If you expand too much. If I tell you about my morning routine, nobody's going to care.
All right, guys. We're joined by Varian, so I guess this is a good enough time as any to start introducing ourselves. Varian, we'll start with you, then we'll go to Marcus, and then we'll go to Josh. So here we go. Varian, tell them who you are.
I'm Varian Grant. I had a great gag set up where I was going to put all this food behind me like I was totally in quarantine, but the gag didn't work. So, my camera wasn't working right. So anyway, I'm Varian Grant. I am the co-owner of Last Call Comics. Been so for the last 8 years. First book I ever did was a little black and white interior action comedy called Psycho Sirens. I'm a father, a husband, a geek, creator, publisher, reluctant taxpayer, sensitivity reader, right, Rob? And artist, shamefully not in that order. And you're watching another episode of the On Cons. That's right. That's where I'm at.
And our friend Marcus. Tell them who you are.
All right, I'm Marcus Roberts. I am the publishing manager at Second Sight Studios. I have been in the comic book community for quite some time and really just started doing comic books here in the last 3 or 4 years and have drifted into the horror genre because to me, it is the best genre, the most challenging. I said before, we don't need another hero, but we can always use a slasher. So I like the horror stuff.
All right, and Josh.
Well, hello, everyone. My name is Josh C. Lyman. I have been doing comic books probably, I'd say, just a little over the last 10 years. I've worked we're from flatting with Aspen Comics, which is just basic colors for other colorists, to inking on webcomics and other things, as well as working in several independent comic books and licensed products. So I kind of just rotate back and forth as far as that's concerned. Earlier in the podcast we were discussing, I have worked on my own books as well. As far as that's concerned, with horror and suspense and things like that. But those are many years ago.
And we could not be joined today by Bradley Golden. He's feeling under the weather. We, of course, hope he feels better as soon as possible. He did say what's up to everyone. He said, sorry, I can't be on, not feeling my best. I don't know why it doubled the message. It's not doubled on my screen, but technology is being tasked a little bit lately, so we're just going to let the error slide by and get right back into horror and suspense. What do you guys think the future of horror is in comics? Because we've gone through this phase of gore. Do you think comics are going to try to set up more like back in the day, like even early, like we're talking 30s, 40s, where they didn't get to show as much? Do you think there'll be a kind of hinting at it, or do you think we're going to go the opposite way and it's going to get a lot more intense, a lot more brutal? Because we're seeing that tipping point right now where there's both types coming out recently. So what do you guys think?
I think that the genre in itself will undergo another split because you do have fans of the particularly gory stuff that really want to see the blood and guts, but yet you still have your traditional fans who are really just looking for something to scare them. So I believe we have enough talented writers and creators wherein they can go either way in their writing. And much like in the 70s in the underground comics, in the underground comic movement, I mean, you didn't just see one type of horror comic book. These guys were putting out anything from vampires to zombies to aliens to psycho killers. And it was something there for everyone. And I believe that's where we're headed again, to a more underground type movement where there's something for everyone.
I agree with that. I think that we're gonna. I was reading. Recently was gifted a set of the old EC comics books and Tales from the Crypt and a couple of other ones that were just like true horror, and because Randy believes that because I'm so young, I don't know what good comics are. So I got all these old comics, and I will admit there are some tales in there that stick with you when you're finished reading the books. To go back to that, I think people try to ape it, and it doesn't really work. But to go back to that organically, I like to see it, and I hope we can. It'd be kind of cool to get some of those old story and old style horror books back. Now, I did see another scary book. It was terrifying. It's actually coming out from Marvel. It's called New Warriors. That was frightening. I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding.
Uh,
I'm just
Barry,
kidding.
the only thing scary about that was that it got approved to print. That's beyond that. Story.
That's my only New Warrior joke for today. I promise. I promise.
Listen, you leave Safe Space, Snowflake, and I don't know who else alone. They'll come up,
Trailblazer.
triggered.
for anybody watching that's not familiar, these are legitimately the names of the characters.
We're not picking on anyone. Trigger's coming soon. He's going to be the friend of Tigger.
No, that's Tiggum and Tiggeridge, right?
No, it's going to be Trigger, who his superpower is going to be blowing up at everybody because they did something that made him mad.
Yeah, he'll be Katie Kaboom in the Marvel world.
Yeah.
Animaniacs with Katie Kaboom.
He could be trigger warning. He gets pissed and he blows up.
There it is.
And he's got to have rainbow hair for some reason. I don't know why, but just rainbow hair really says it for me.
Well, I know the colorist, and he's been working for a long time with several people on the circuit, Rich Bernatovich, and all of their independent comic books for probably a good couple of decades now, with Sentinels and a few of their other storylines. And they always focused on using some of these brighter, higher cyan and pink tone colors. So it kind of makes sense from the colorist perspective, but from the storyline, we'll just have to see what happens. I'm curious to see. Yes, we have our instinct opinions, much like when it comes to a horror or suspense movie. Where it's like, yeah, I'm not gonna go see that. Like The Purge. I'm like, I'm not gonna go see that. You know what happens in The Purge? I stay in my apartment and then I pull out a gun.
Well, you mentioned
one
colors.
entrance into my apartment.
You mentioned colors. Has that ever taken you out of a horror book or a suspense book? The colors they were used. Anybody?
Oh, easily.
I do want to that Bradley has actually joined us. Bradley Golden has, I guess, feeling a little better. Bradley, what's going on, brother?
Hey, what's happening, guys?
How's it going, Bradley?
What's going on, man?
Yeah, I'm not feeling too well, but I just couldn't pass it up, man.
I hear that. So go ahead, continue, and then we're going to introduce Bradley. What were you saying, Varian?
I was saying that I was asking if the color tones and the color choices used in a book that's about a horror book or a suspense noir book, has that ever taken you out of the book, and should people consult with a colorist and be really involved when they're trying to get those themes across? Because I've been looking at studies on movie lighting lately and realizing there's an art to that. Like when characters move from room to room, there's actually thought process in that, and I had no idea. So another reason why I never became a director.
Well, as far as color goes with me, I can do the color, particularly in the suspense books. In the horror, seeing the blood, whether it's red or black, doesn't make a difference. That was one of the whole things with the Comics Code Authority back in the day, and the purpose for the whole underground movement. The Comics Code Authority didn't want them to show blood, and if they did show blood, the blood had to be black, or the book had to be in black and white. So, growing up reading both color and both black and white, I tended to associate the color horror comics more with the mainstream, and those stories weren't as scary. But the black and white comics magazines like Creepy and Eerie, I mean, yeah, they scared the mess out of you, and they were black and white.
I guess coloring, it can always ruin it, just like bad lettering. But again, I'm not a horror fan, so I'm probably the wrong person. The better person to ask is Bradley. Bradley, when you're creating, because I notice you like to dabble in color and black and white, you do a little Sin City type stuff sometimes. So how important is coloring to you, Bradley?
I mean, when doing a horror comic or a thriller, whatever, color is a big part of the story, gathering the atmosphere and whatnot. But I'm from the old school where it's just black and white. You know what I mean? It's not a great big deal. If you can tell the overall story and gather the readers, I want to say, emotion through just a few panels of black and white through the story, but adding color does add to it. So to me, color is not a really big deal, honestly.
And Bradley, tell everyone who you are. You missed our intro section, so let them know how great you are.
My name is Bradley Golden. I'm the CEO and the president of Second Sight Studios. I've created Mississippi Zombie for Caliber Comics, Leave on the Light, horror comics. I write Exciting Comics magazine, and currently have These Damn Kids coming out through Antarctic Press.
Good old Antarctic.
All right, guys. So what do you guys want to talk about? This is also an open mic, so I'm giving it to you with the topic of horror and suspense. It's open for the floor. What do you guys like, dislike? Talk to me.
I got a question.
Sure.
The show goes off the rails. No, I'm just kidding. Okay, so let's just say you guys have a story you want to tell, a comic that you want to put out, and you go to a publisher, and the publisher's like, "Sweet, I love your story. I want to publish it, but it's a capes and tight story. This needs horror. This needs suspense." Are you able to put those, like a monstrous, or monsters and ghost demons? Are you able to put that type of story, or put those type of embellishments in your story without losing your character? Would that upset you? Would you walk away from the deal?
No, I could do it.
No.
Writer. It's what I do. I write.
Mm-hmm.
I've actually done that already. Back when there's a little known company called Insane Comics, I helped Gary McClendon do Chess Masters. I don't know if y'all remember that.
Yeah.
It kind of had a little bit of my horror elements in it, where the general was just a straight up lunatic. Didn't care about harming civilians or whatnot. And I recently did it with Victoria Black.
Okay.
And I don't know if you're familiar with the Supreme Power comics, Squadron Supreme from Marvel, early 2000s.
Yeah.
Those comics had a hint of horror to them because of the behavior of the heroes. The hero that, you're in a world where there's only a limited number of superheroes, and they know they don't have superpowers, so they can act any way they want to. Recently, the movie Brightburn. Brightburn was a horror movie about a badass superpowered kid. Like, what are you gonna? And you couldn't spank him. So, I mean, it is very possible. And as Rob said, it's with the writer. If the writer is worth his weight in salt, then yeah, he can take the story in any direction he wants to, no matter what the characters are.
Josh?
What do you think, Josh? Can you on demand write something into a story? Because I've proven this already with a farting elephant. So anything I put my mind to, it's whether or not I want to.
Yeah, I would have to say it's whether or not I want to. I mean, frankly speaking, comic books are something that you either go full heart and soul, or you are willing to put yourself out on the street corner and show a little leg. So you have to go one of the two directions. So it's really boils down to is like if you start working on a comic book and you're working with a writer and they suddenly go, oh, by the way, this, and you didn't write anything in your contract, as long as it's, you know, they're aware, hey, you know, there's additional fees for modifying. Sometimes you just have to go for the practical. But it's great because then you can just reflect on it years later and be like, oh dear God, why did I ever draw that? Oh dear God, why did I ever draw that? Just hope no one ever shows up at your table with it.
I can tell you this, Variant. If Marvel called me right now and said, hey, Rob, we want you to come on. We like what you've written. You've done great. As a matter of fact, you've done so good. You can pick any book you want to work on right now. You know the book I would pick, Variant?
What's that?
New Warriors.
Oh
yeah.
And I would keep every character, but you'd find out how quickly every one of them is a villain. Not who you thought they were. Safe Space, he's the guy making everyone's life miserable so he can feel better about himself. He'll be one of those villains, you know. Snowflake will be a winter demon who's trying to freeze everyone to death because she doesn't think anyone deserves to live anymore, all because she didn't get hugged as a child. I'm just saying, this is the story I'd write for Marvel. Come on, Marvel, hit me up. No, but seriously, kidding around aside, I think anything you can do, you can write as a writer. I think they proved that with Bunny Batman when Gordon got the bunny suit Batman, and that was Scott Snyder, and he didn't have a choice, like Josh said. They gave him Batman, they hired him, he signed a contract, and they said, oh, by the way, we're killing Bruce Wayne. Oops. And you have to make Gordon a Batman, and he has to be in a suit. And by the way, we're not going to explain why, but he's 30 years younger. Oops.
Yeah.
You write it, and that's what Scott Snyder did. I never liked the story idea, but I loved how Scott Snyder handled it. I think he did an amazing job. And Greg, I always say his name wrong. Greg Capullo, thank you. Yeah. He did an amazing job of trying to make that look badass. So that shows you that a creator can even deliver under the worst circumstances, unlike New Warriors, which is just going to shit the bed. I'm sorry, it has to be said. No one else said it. It had to be said out loud. I don't think that's going to be good. And I feel bad because, honestly, I do think that they're serious about it. It's like Thundercats Roar. They were serious about that. That wasn't a joke. And they did a really clever thing with Teen Titans that everyone should check out, where they're kind of mocking the fans and picking on them for not accepting different versions. And I can admit, I've been a vocal fan who probably has taken it a little too serious. To quote Randy's thing, they're fictional characters, right? Fictional. Fiction. And I've taken it a little too serious, but you got to do that as a fan. That's what people don't understand, is that I'm a fan of this. You won me over. We once dated, and sure, you might be my ex now because you got canceled, but I wanted to see you come back stronger because maybe I wanted to restart our relationship. And then you come back and you were a woman and now you're a guy and I'm confused. That was Thundercats Roar to me. I just didn't understand it. Everything changed so drastically. I was like, oh my. Like, where do we go from here? I don't know.
If I were tapped for Marvel to write something, I would have to do Morbius. Not just because the movie came out, but I've been a fan of Morbius for a long time. I love what they did with Venom, making Venom even more scary, or bringing Venom more into the horror genre and less out of the superhero genre. And I would do that with Morbius. I would make Morbius the baddest vampire ever. Ever. He would have the ability not just to suck blood from humans, but from Superman himself with his kryptonite teeth. I mean, Morbius would be the baddest thing going.
Oh, sorry, Marcus.
Did you see that? That's one of the characters they've added into the, into this comic we've been discussing.
New Warriors has like a Morbius.
Negative, yeah.
Yeah.
He got a blood transfusion.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I have to touch on this though. You can't make that happen. No one's going to be more badass than Blade as a vampire. I'm sorry, you're wrong. You're just wrong. Yeah. Go home.
Yeah, but see, with Blade, characteristically, Blade has been more hero than anything else, even as a half vampire. But Morbius is supposed to be vampire. Morbius is supposed to be like flying around, sucking on Spider-Man, snacking on the Black Cat and every other hero in New York. Instead of being what he is, the potential for him is just lost in the comic books because they keep him in the superhero side. Take him out of the superhero side. Let him be that unstoppable vampire that's just taking everybody, that's sucking all the blood, sucking all the life out of people.
I don't know. You're making it sound very sexual. He's going around sucking people off. What are you trying to write? You're talking about horror. Damn
like, hey, where'd you get those marks from?
Yeah.
Right there.
You said Black Cat. I was all into it. I was like, tell me more. No, but let's talk about it because I'm bringing this up as a joke, but it's a serious segue. Why do you guys think there's so much sex in horror? Because you can't go with without a horror film, at least just joking about the sexuality and some girl with her boobs half out. Why do you think is sex and violence really a thing that is?
Yeah, psychology. It comes down to the primal nature, fight or flight, and adrenaline pumping through your veins on something that's going to be attacking you. Just the boring level of it. It's like, hey, it keeps the blood flowing. It keeps the blood pumping. Yes, it may direct itself elsewhere, but that's pretty much the premise.
Pretty much, yeah.
Survive. You know, you go even into war movies, it's pretty much the same thing. I'm like, all right, you just killed all the, the bad guys in this Viking scene or the World War II scene. What do you do afterwards? You go out on the town and you go and do what you need to do.
Well, oddly enough, it seems like the people who most like horror films like to see a little boobage in it as well. Like horror comics, they like to see a boobage. That's like most people who like war comics, they're gun enthusiasts. Like they want to see big guns. They want to see various type of weapons in that comic book because it just seem to walk hand in hand. So yeah, in the horror movie, you got the slasher coming at you, and you got the flasher coming at you. You're gonna stop and look at the flasher, so the slasher can get you.
Plus, on the female side of it comes down to is the vulnerability. Suddenly, go, hey, in this moment where this is happening. So it can lull you back in, but that's another topic.
One of my favorite scenes in Friday the 13th was like in the first one with the two kids on the cot and they're making out, and Jason stabs them both. Yeah. Like, I love for some reason it was like, see, you should have been with everybody else instead of trying to get you a piece. Now look what you got.
I like the newer one. When Jason X, when the foes in the bag, he started beating them across the tree.
You know what I want to see though, and I'm terrified of Freddy Krueger. Absolutely ruined the ability to. I still can't sleep right. That movie done fucked me up for life. But I want to see like someone in Freddy Krueger, like he goes into some demented bitch's mind, and she's like, "Ooh, do it again, stab me again." Ooh, like I think of Stewie in my mind for some reason. Ooh, harder, yes. You stabbed me, you bad boy. I want to see like Freddy be like, this chick's fucking nuts. It's crazy.
Freddy's one of my favorite characters. He's one of my favorite characters, and when I make a villain, I always I have like a Freddy factor. Like, how terrifying is this guy? Because
what would Freddy do?
Yeah, because I like that. The ability to just come to your dreams and get you, that's scary. I remember being a kid and my mother and father told me a story about how and I remember it, where I woke up from a dream where Freddy had got my aunt. He killed her. My aunt lived with us, and I woke up. Now with Freddy, unfortunately, that the nightmare isn't even over once you've woken up. Nope. So I woke up and my mother and father said I ran down the hall into their room and jumped over them and into the bed with them, and I told them, I said, Freddy's in there. He already got Pearl. Save me. And I'm hiding behind them, and my mother looked at my dad. My dad looked at him and said, you go look. Shit, I'm not going. I don't know who's in there. And the fact that people started grabbing Freddy and bringing him out of their dreams. No, thank you.
Yeah.
No, thank you. I will.
So you're home tomorrow.
No Freddy Krueger for me.
Eh, Candyman scared me the most.
Yeah,
I hear a lot of people say that.
Candyman scared me.
I mean, to be blunt, back in the when that came out, yeah, that's jacked up. Like everything about the character, the sub origin, the just all of it. It's like nope, don't play that game.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. I remember.
Well, I guess for me, as odd as this may sound, I came from a fairly sheltered childhood, and that's not necessarily a bad thing or a good thing. But my parents, we didn't really watch a lot of secular films or listen to a lot of secular music or anything. So most of my exposure to modern day and classic horror of any kind was a decade, long time. As far as that's concerned, it wasn't even until like I'd say 2002, maybe 2003, when I was in college and on my own and was finally getting the blockbuster super specials and things like that. Finally getting to play catch up on decades and decades of films.
I don't know if you even got that thing plugged up.
I don't know. I hate to give my age away, but I remember when the Texas Chainsaw Massacre came out. I remember when the Texas Chainsaw Massacre was new, first came out.
And that's one of those interesting things too. It's like I feel like the number one people that end up being like severely jacked up. No offense to everybody. As far as like when it comes to a specific character, it's because they saw it at a younger age. And it has that psychological effect on you for the rest of your life.
I don't know, man. I'll be honest. I saw Halloween for the first time when I was 19. That shit fucked me up still. Like, that dude did not give up. That guy don't care. He's like the marathon man. He'll come for your ass no matter what you do to him. But Halloween, that got me, especially when Rob Zombie redid it. Ooh, that shit was twisted.
Now,
they had like every single, like there was another version of Mike, but it wasn't Mike.
Yes, Halloween 2. Didn't they do like that weird children?
Maybe I'm thinking Resurrection. One of the Halloween movies is terrible.
Oh,
Like,
2?
a lot of them.
Really bad.
well, after the first one, they all went downhill to me.
Yeah.
But I remember the movie I Spit on Your Grave when that came out. And
the old one, right? The original.
yeah, the original.
Okay.
And that was pretty unnerving as well. Because it was something that during that time period, you didn't see too many movies like that. I mean, I remember watching Charles Manson on regular television. I was like, wow. And that was scary. They didn't show any blood. And then just a hint of them cutting out Sharon Tate's baby was like terrifying. They didn't show us that. But that was scary because during that time, those kind of things just weren't talked about.
Yeah.
They weren't shown. So yeah, it was easy to scare somebody back then.
Yeah.
I'd like to think that I've had a fairly rational perspective when it comes to when horror, but I think the first time anything like got to me, like even borderline, like I'm closing my eyes, I don't need to see this. I went to a film middle of high school, maybe like 17, 18 kind of deal, with a friend, and at the time it was somebody I was trying to again. She's one of my closer friends now, so it's one of those things where it's like that's pretty awesome. But we went and saw The Grudge in theaters, and it was one of those things where it's like I started noticing back then. I was like, man, there's a lot of random cuts in here to different parts, and I suddenly realized that they were like slicing in cuts from another movie. So that took me away from it a little bit. But like there was a scene where they found a jaw just randomly just laying around in the attic. And so I heard, and you turn around, you see like this woman facing the other way. And it's the only time I've ever covered my eyes in my entire life. It was like, I don't need to see that. I really don't. I don't need to see, a woman with her jaw ripped off. It just comes down to the exposure of choosing what you see. Other than that, I'd say as a kid, the only thing that really messed with me were Chucky. and
Chucky.
same kind of deal. I was we were in the let's call it. We were in England, and my dad was wrapping up one of his martial arts classes, teaching, and we flipped on the TV in the front of the rec room, and they were doing like a section of, they were like Chucky chasing down this kid in the toy factory. And since then I don't mess with dolls, like flat out. Don't put me in an antique shop with a bunch of dolls. Don't, I'll watch a couple of those movies, like what was it? It's Dead No More or Dead Silence, I think, with the ventriloquist ghost.
Yeah.
Tongue, that's all the tongues of the people that's ripped them out of. Nope. No. I watched that at night and I said, nope, this ain't happening. I watched it in the daytime about a week later and I was like, this isn't as bad, but I'm not messing with this. Like, I mean, it comes down to is like, what for you? For me, it comes down to is like dolls, something that have no form or soul, suddenly getting a soul and it's twisted because of the form that it's in. So again, it comes down to the psychosis of when you see something.
Yeah, I can relate to that. Back in the day, I read the book Magic, and ventriloquist dolls are things that I don't mess with. Chucky doesn't bother me, but you have somebody holding Chucky with their arm behind him, and it's like, hey, for some reason, when he's transformed into a ventriloquist doll, that's kind of scary.
Yeah, good old Slappy. Goosebumps. Way to make it for everybody.
All right, guys, believe it or not, we're at the 1 hour mark. The panel's up. Time to say goodbye. We're going to start with how people came in, starting with Josh.
Came into just the show. Well, thank you. I appreciate it. And hope you guys had fun and enjoyed the little back and forth between all of us. And hey, hope you're staying safe in the stay homes.
All right. Marcus.
Thanks for having me. It's always good, man, to hang out with you, Rob. You're my boy. Good to hang out with everyone else, including Bradley, who is technically my boss. And hey, if anybody out there, you're interested in writing a horror story and you think you got the chops, check me out. Come holler at me and let's see what you got.
And Varian.
Hello, everybody out there, and goodbye. It's been fun. I have horror comics as well. I'm not very good at them, but I try to write them. I write what scares me. So yeah, you can find me at kid_V on Twitter, Variant Grant on Facebook, Last Call Comics, IndieVolt.com, IndieVolt Radio on Google, Android, and iOS, and IndieVolt TV on Roku. And that's pretty much it.
And thank you all for tuning in. We appreciate you spending time with us today and talking about some horror and some suspense. This has been part of the ongoing panel amazingness that all these amazing creators have come together to create. And it's brought to you by the India Advocates Network, Indie Vault Radio, and, of course, by me, the Underground Indie Devil, who is always advocating for underground comics and indie comics. Thank you all for turning up today. And Phil wants to know, before we go, Phil asked, Marcus, where can they find you? I guess you didn't.
I'm sorry. You can find me on Facebook, Marcus Roberts. Second Sight Studios LLC is a fan page. You can also hit me up on Twitter. DM me once you get on Facebook, and I can send you phone number, email, and whatnot. Because we at Second Sight Studios, we are currently with our Mississippi Zombie project looking for indie creators, looking for indie writers who are interested in doing horror stories, whether they be the old style stories like the EC comics or something new and terrifying. We are actively seeking submissions for the Mississippi Zombie Anthology. So yeah, Marcus Robertson on Facebook, on Twitter. Hit me up.
All right, guys, thanks for tuning in. We'll see you at the next amazing panel that you guys are making amazing with your questions and comments. Thank you for tuning in. We'll see you tomorrow at 4 p.m. And there goes Facebook.